So after last week's crushing defeat, my opponent wanted a rematch of the Vampire Covenant Dread Elf matchup. To be honest, his luck was very low in this first matchup that we did. So here you can see the Vampire Covenant list. It's just the same list as the previous time. Then for my Dread Elf opponent, he played a list now that had even more Blades of Nab and even more Dread Judges. I think this is the second iteration is the better of the two lists, but let me know in the comments if you think otherwise. Then for spell selection, I got quite settled by now on the types of spells that I take on my Vampire Count's army. So obviously the Vampire Count is a Wizard Apprentice, so you can only take the number 1 or the Hereditary, but the Hereditary I find is more useful on the other two characters. So he always takes Pentagram of Pain. Then the BSB ends up with the Hereditary from Arcane Knowledge, and he takes then Breath of Corruption and Hand of Glory. And the General from the Magical Heirloom gets the Hereditary and also Dead Arise because he's the General. And in addition to that, I sometimes switch this a little bit up. So I usually end up taking Spectral Blades just because it has such low casting cost. And it gives you the possibility of getting Lethal Strike, which is highly usable against any armor opponents. And in this case I took Hasten the Hour because I thought it would be quite valuable to remove the champions of my opponent's units to force his assassin to get challenged by my champion. And also if we were to put all of his characters and champions and altar in one unit together, I could cast a bigger version to target 3 different models. Then for my opponent he had Witchcraft, so he took Raven's Wing, Twisted Effigy, the Wheel Turns and Will-o'-the-Wisp on his Mage, on his Master, and Deceptive Glamour is the bound spell for the Medusae. Then I have some quick army shots of the two armies just after deployment, so here you can see the Vampire Covenant, and then you can see the Dread Elves. So this Dread Elf army is my next army that I'm going to actually repaint, because yeah, the way that I painted it before is the 16-year-old me dabbing some paint on there, and for a 16-year-old I did quite well, I would say, but to my personal standards currently it's I would like to have it repainted. So the Witch Elves on the left, they already got their repaint just as the Hunting Chariots, but the rest of the army still has to be repainted. So you can also see a Pegasus on the bottom right. That's because I don't have any Medusa models currently, so I'm still looking for those. So we played Refused Flank and King of the Hill, and my opponent was able to choose table sides. So he also had to choose first which terrain feature to go for the secondary objective, and he chose the forest on the bottom left. And my army has only 4 scoring units, and if I were to stretch out my army a long way, like by choosing something all the way on the right, then it would be not advantageous to my army, I would say, especially because my opponent has so many small blocks that are scoring. So I actually also took the forest on the left, and I think that was the good choice. And then we go into deployment. So this is a bit also where the Medusae of my opponent shine a bit, because, well, he has 3 drops that allow him to figure out what I'm doing, basically. And I don't have that many kind of nonsense drops in my army. So I have the Varkalak that can still Vanguard. I have the Phantom Hosts that usually I can just place wherever and they're useful. Now with the Medusae on the other side, they're less useful because the Medusae have magical attacks. And I have the Great Bats that I can drop somewhere, and they only see play in like turn 3 or 4 normally. And well, the rest of the army works quite independently normally, either as a group with the Dark Coach or on its own. So that works quite well. Yeah, so you see me deploy, and well, also you see my opponent deploy, obviously. I think I'm just my plan for the battle was to just bunker up a bit and see what would happen if my opponent were to come to me. Also, because I have Pentagram of Pain, I have the Occultism Breath of Corruption, I have the Evocation Snipe spell, so I can dictate the game quite a bit in terms of what's actually going to happen once we meet by using these spells. So I thought that was quite good. And yeah, I felt quite confident about everything, really, because the issue is that, well, I have this Court of the Damned that lowers the agility of my opponent by 2 when it's within 6 inches of it, and I have my BSB, and otherwise I have a block of 45 skeletons. 45 skeletons is hard to chew through for any army, basically. And then I thought that Court, together with the Dark Coach on the right, could protect my flank quite effectively, because effectively they go up to agility 8 with the -2 on my opponent, and then with for the Court 6 strength 5 attacks, for the Coach 4 strength 5 attacks, and the unit with the Court is going to take some damage if some of the elves remain, so the higher attack value there helps a bit. And the Coach on its own, well, it has just a 3+ armor save, a 4+ Aegis, so that should be fine also. The only issue I thought was the risk of losing my vampire count to his hunting chariot. But after the battle I realized that I shouldn't have been so worried about this. And also I could have used my Winged Reapers to prevent a little bit of shooting from them. But again, it's quite sad to see a hill on the side of your opponent with the hunting chariot, because that means that he cannot hide anywhere, which is why I put him out of range all the way on the bottom. And well, my opponent at some point decided to drop everything, so he had a +3 on going first, which is not a definite going first, but it is quite a confident one. So I decided to put the vampire count on the bottom out of range. Maybe I should have just risked it, but I calculated it after the battle, and yeah, my opponent has per chariot a 12% chance to more or less to remove the model from the field in one go, because he does D3 wounds with clipped wings, so my model is on a spectral steed, so it is flying. So yeah, so one hunting chariot, you could still run the risk, preferably not turn 1 maybe, but turn 2 you could. 2 hunting chariots, that's pushing your luck a little, especially if your opponent can still just hang back a little. But I think I could have played it quite aggressively indeed. So what is happening? My opponent gets the first turn, and well, he just has a lot of small units of Blades of Nab coming my way. And I thought he would have to be quite worried because of me frenzy baiting the unit. But they are only advanced 5, so only within 12 inches he has to be really worried about it. And then he goes onto the hill with his Dread Legionnaires, with Divine Alto, with Mage, with Assassin. And I thought that was quite a bold move, actually. So maybe that's to make sure that he can reach anywhere in my lines. But yeah, I didn't really know if this was the move that he should have been able to pull off, actually. But then again, the assassin can dish out also quite some damage. But yeah. Otherwise, on my field, I have the Vakalak, who just prevented the frenzy baiting of my vampire knight. And during my deployment, I already told my opponent, like, yeah, I made a mistake. And the mistake that I spotted was that, well, on the left there's the objective for the secondary, the secondary scenario objective, and my only scoring unit that is going to have the possibility of ending up there are the Vampire Knights. So I set them up during deployment so that my opponent could frenzy bait them, and that was a mistake. I believe that was the mistake that I was talking about back then. So, well, the situation would have been entirely different had the Winged Reapers been at the front and the Vampire Knights at the back. So the charges in my first turn, the only charge I had were the Winged Reapers against the Medusa in the woods. This was a charge on a 10, which I thought was, well, I didn't have anything to lose there, I figured. So I declared it and I had a failed charge in the end. And otherwise the Varkulak just moved up quite aggressively, probably too aggressively. But I didn't realize the actual offensive output of Blades of Nab. And here you can see me just trying to make sure that my opponent is gonna get stuck into the skeletons, just keeping everything in the front of the big block, and that should be fine. Like he can probably munch through like 10 skeletons, maybe more, during a turn, but that's fine by me. I can just hold out and counter charge with the Winged Reapers. Yeah, and that should be fine. And at this point my opponent told me that he was actually quite confident at how it worked out so far. And yeah, I was not really convinced yet, in the sense that, yeah, I must say, what you're gonna see in a minute is that the Varkulak is gonna get charged by the Blades of Nab to some horrific end results. I wasn't expecting the Varkulak to get a lot of damage from the blades, because they still have just strength 3. But with the altar that can give death trance, you still get quite a high damage output. And I don't have any armor save stopping them, which is normally their big hurdle. Which is also why I thought that this, out of the 3 options that I had for him, like Empire, Warriors of the Dark Gods, or Dread Elves, or Vampire Covenant, that this was still the best matchup for him. Yeah, and then I had the feeling that I had set it up quite properly. My opponent then declared a charge just with his Wizard Master against my Great Bats, which honestly I totally didn't see coming. And when I was putting down the Great Bats, I was like, yeah, maybe this is a risky position, because there's always stuff that you can just maybe not see coming, and putting them in between the units was definitely more dangerous than putting them behind the skeleton unit. So normally on tournaments I also do this. So you have some just signature moves that you do just because you know they work, like putting your bats just really behind your skeletons instead of in positions where they are now. So my opponent had a charge roll on a 10, but he had a reroll from the hill, and then the first roll had a 9 and the second roll had a 12, so he made it in the end. Had he not made it, it would have been quite a disaster to him, I think. Because then your Wizard Master just moves out of the unit, cannot move in any other unit. You're kind of stuck with this Wizard Master within your line, so you have to go beyond it, I think. So he would have had to go beyond his own Wizard Master with his unit. Yeah, it would have just completely ripped up his lines, or he would have had to stay there with his Wizard Master and then flee the next turn on my charge. Anyway, it would have been quite an unfortunate situation, definitely. So what else is moving? So yeah, this is also one thing that I thought my opponent did wrong. So the Dread Knights, they are coming over to my side, but now they already spent 2 turns to come over to my side, and yeah, they're not really contributing so far. They're not putting up any pressure. They're not, they're not doing anything. So at a point where he was dropping down everything, he already knew where most of my army was going to be. The only thing that I didn't deploy yet mostly were the Winged Reapers, and they either could have ended up on the right side of the board or on the left side. My opponent probably didn't see it coming where I put them, I think, because otherwise he wouldn't have put the Dread Knights on the right, I think. Because as you can see, in turn 2 they're now just moving up, turn 3 they will still have to move up, turn 4 they might get a charge off. Yeah, that's like turn 4 starting to put pressure on your opponent is quite late in the game indeed. And I can at this point still easily counter it with the Dark Coach, just moving back on the hill and threatening his knights. So yeah, otherwise we have a combat between. Oh no, he was just chaffing up my Phantom Hosts. He killed the Vakulak, and yeah, he just moved up a unit of Witch Elves in front of my Black Coach. And then we go to my turn. I charge into his Divine Altar unit, and I thought, well, maybe, you know what, maybe I'll break them. Could happen, you never know. So here's one of the situations where you would want to reroll to wound. Because I do have the ranks and I do have a charge, I have a Legion Standard. So based on static combat res, I am winning currently. And the amount of attacks that both of us have, so he has 10 attacks with, well, combined between the Legionnaires and the Riders on the altar, and then he has 4 attacks with the Avatar. And for me, I have 11 attacks with Skeletons. Obviously, they are way worse than his guys, but then again, I have parry. So it wouldn't be too far-fetched to see that he does like 2 more wounds than I do, and it can swing a little bit. So in the end, it could happen that he just only does 1 more wound than I do, and in that case, I do have a charge. I have 4 ranks. I have a banner, and he has 3 ranks and banner. So that would put him on a -1, -2, -1, I think. Yeah, that shouldn't normally be enough to break him, but it's 9 days, so special stuff happens all the time. So what else? So on the left, I totally misplay my my vampire count, because I thought, well, at the position where he is at, he can most definitely charge something the next turn. And yeah, this is why I hadn't just really given a lot of thought to the board. Because as you can see quite clearly here, the Witch Elves on the left, they can easily charge into the Skeletons. The Hunting Chariot can easily go away. The Medusa can easily go away, or, well, it's not really a job for a vampire count to mop up a Medusa. So it should have just gone way more aggressively towards his line. And then the Dark Coach on the right, I placed it just in front of the Witch Elf, so that they would have to charge me instead of me having to charge him. Because that way, if he charges me, then I get to strike first, whilst I'm in range of the court. And then I will just completely mop up most of his unit before he gets to strike. Then he gets to strike, he might do a wound, because I still have a 3+ armor save, 4+ Aegis save. And then the horses and the coachman will just finish them off, and I get to do a pivot, and then I can charge wherever I want. That was the plan. The only thing that I didn't take into account is the fact that the assassin, who has multiple wounds against characters, has multiple wounds against war platforms, because war platforms actually count as characters with some exceptions, and yeah, I totally didn't realize that. So yeah, so my entire tactic here on the game was built upon the fact that my war platform would just make sure that I got to strike first against all of my opponent's troops, basically. And then if I were to strike first with in the unit with the BSB and the altar, the court, with 10 strength 5 attacks on the Dread Judges, in the situation of the coach 4 attacks strength 5 against the Witch Elves, and in case of the Skeletons, didn't really matter because I figured that they would be a sacrifice anyway. Then it would just mean that most of the Dread Elves would be gone by the end of this turn. Yeah, as you can read from that, the situation was a bit different. I also still had the Touch of the Reapers, or the Snipe from Evocation to knock out the champion of my opponent, but due to the fact that I misplayed the Great Bats, the wizard was able to go into my my Necromancer bunker, so I wasn't able to cast this spell. So that was a very big shame, because that would have solved the problem to me, because the Dread Judges, they have a champion and they have an assassin, and then I have a skeleton champion and a BSB. If it had only been the assassin, so if I had killed the champion, then the BSB or the skeleton captain could have challenged out the assassin, and then nothing would have changed, basically. So there were just a couple of things going wrong there at the same time. So there's a lot of dice rolling, and then first there's the Witch Elves. So my opponent actually got 3 units of Witch Elves against the Skeletons. So there was a total of, let me see, there were like 14 Witch Elves, like 52 attacks or so of the Witch Elves into the Skeletons, and that in the end he caused like 25 wounds. That did hurt. And then at the end of that combat, the entire block of Skeletons was just gone. But still, per unit of Witch Elves, you're doing about close to 10 wounds, I would say, against their ideal target, basically. Like, you're not gonna encounter any other any situation better than infantry that has a resilience of 3 and a 5+ armor save. Well, the best target would be zombies, obviously. But yeah, realistically, you don't see any other target that's better suited for Witch Elves than Skeletons. So then we go to the next combat, where my opponent he very nicely explains to me the rules regarding this assassin, and then he starts rolling the dice, and he does 3 or 4 poison hits to make matters worse, and then he kills off the court in just one go. And that is really bad for the unit, because now at this time the unit gets to strike at the same agility as my BSB. So yeah, my BSB only gets to as he's going to strike at the same time as the Dread Judges. The Dread Judges are still able to knock off like 8 of my Skeletons, getting him the combat resolution that he needs in order to not lose terribly in this combat, basically. Because if he hadn't removed the Court of the Damned, he would have lost this combat just by an incredible amount. And I realized we actually forgot to take a fear test here, so maybe that would have made matters different. Yeah, and then we go to the wizard. I think the wizard just sticks in combat, and then at the end we do the Witch Elves, and the Witch Elves oh my god, so I don't manage to do a single wound on the Witch Elves, or maybe 1 or something, and my opponent manages to do something like 2 wounds or so on my coach. That was incredible. And then yeah, I don't manage to get rid of the Witch Elves there. Even though I have, with the Vampire, 2+2 hit, 2+2 wound. And with the Coachman I have 3+2 hit, 2+2 wound. And with the Horses even I have 3+2 hit, 3+2 wound. So something happened there that was terrible. And then yeah, the Winged Reapers come into the Medusa. Yeah, basically at this point the game is kind of over in the sense that yeah, the one thing that I relied my entire tactics on were quite well, was not applicable because my opponent was able to get a chord out of my list without suffering any of the negative consequences of it. And also I really misplayed the skeleton block by charging into the Dread Legionnaires. But honestly, it all started with misplay of the Great Bats. Like had I had the Great Bats, I could have chaffed my opponent's Dread Legionnaires for a turn. And realistically, I don't think he would have been able to go in, because he could have gone in and then he would have had an overrun into the next unit that I would have put there. But then in my turn, I would have been able to countercharge with the Winged Reapers. Because I could have positioned them in such a way that my opponent couldn't get them, and I could have a counter charge. So that would be a problem to him. Yeah, so in this turn of his, he still doesn't manage to get a charge off with the Dread Knights, which is also why I think that either his army plays just too broadly, or his this is where you can see that the Knights they got misplayed, I would say. And otherwise, I am able in this turn, I believe, to break the Dread Judges with the Assassin, but the damage has already been done, and yeah, they have definitely served their purpose. So I get to go into one of his hunting chariots, which, yeah, during the entire game, neither of his hunting chariots actually managed to wound my, or well, to get a wound through on my vampire count. He hit a couple of times. Once he failed to wound, once I made my ward save. Yeah, it's. Oh, I also once made an armor save because they only have AP3. So yeah, these hunting chariots, I think they're nice to get a couple of wounds on big monsters, but yeah, I think the Dread Elves have some other answers to big monsters that in a list like this are better suited. Something like well, basically the Witch Elves or the Blades of Nab and also the Dread Judges are also already better answers to monsters than the hunting chariots. You don't really need the hunting chariots, I find. Because even if you just have a unit of Dread Judges that flies into any monster, you hit it most likely on 3+, you wound it most likely on 3+. You have a reroll on the 2-hit roll, so you would do something like 4 wounds or so. I would say 4 or 3 or 4 wounds. And for a unit that's 250 points, that's not too bad. Like the enemy monster, it's kind of. I wouldn't be too sure that it just removes 7 infantry or 10 infantry models in one round. Even if it does, well, then you just pay 250 points to get rid of 4 wounds of a monster, 3 to 4 wounds. For some monsters, that's quite decent. It's just steam tanks that will give you some trouble. But if you go in with a big block of Blades of Dread Judges, then that's also fine, of course. So what is happening on the field? So my opponent had to charge with his Blades of Nab into the flank of my unit with BSP. Otherwise he charged into the flank of my Dark Coach. And well, last turn my Winged Reapers had an overrun into his Blades of Nab into the flank. And And then once we go to combat, once we do the combat with the Blades of Nab against my BSB, he bounces with the blades. It was actually quite okay for him to have this unit in there, because that meant that my BSB wasn't able to strike on the hunting chariot, because by now my champion had been killed in the unit and he still had a champion, so I had to accept the challenge. Which meant that his hunting chariot only lost by 1 or 2 and he managed to stick around. And otherwise, yeah, the Dark Coach, this was insane. So he has 6 knights, full unit, 7 attacks, and he hits me on 3+, he wounds me on 3+, with a reroll of the ones. He does something like 5 wounds or so, and I make 4 or even 5 Aegis saves. And then I proceed to just kill the unit. So in the end I managed to do 4 wounds to the unit, and I managed to win the combat. But I don't make my vampiric roll, unfortunately. But in the greater scope of things, I don't think this really mattered, because yeah, this Dark Coach is not gonna turn the battle around. Even though I still managed to pick up quite some points here and there. So by this point, his Wizard Master was still in combat with my Necromancer. My Necromancer, he was still on the game, although his zombies all evaporated to a very relentless Wizard Master and his Medusa buddy by this time. And then in my magic phase, I thought I could try to regrow my skeletons, and I probably should have, and also try to regrow my coach. And I really wanted to do this, so I tried to pressurize my opponent into dispelling some magic that I thought wasn't that important at all. So the first thing I started off was a 5+ Aegis save on my Necromancer, just to pretend that I would want to save him. It's a spell on a 5+, so I cast it, and then I got like an 11, and I was very disappointed with getting this 11, because I would much rather have had a 7, and then my opponent would try to dispel it with like 3 dice. And well, the Necromancer was gonna die anyway. So the next spell I tried to cast was Breath of Corruption onto my Necromancer, also on a 5 or 6+. And I got another 10 or 11, and my opponent was like, yeah, oh my god, you're just kidding me, this is not real. And I was also like, no, please, no, I don't want this, because I wanted to draw out the dice of my opponent so I could actually cast an Arise. So in the end I did not get what I wanted this magic phase, which was to grow back the wound on the Dark Coach, to heal the Dark Coach for an extra wound with the Necromancer, possibly, and get some skeletons back. Ideally do it twice, but well. So then we go into combat, and then we go to the combat with the Dark Coach. And my opponent strikes at the same time as the vampire on top of the coach. The vampire doesn't do anything, and he just kills my coach with like 3 attacks. He just kills it. Oh yeah, okay, that was fun. So I had some hopes for the coach there, but well, they were quickly fading away. Because it was still within 6 inches of the Winged Reapers, I believe, and also within 12 inches of the BSB, so it wouldn't crumble down. It was Vampiric on a 3+, it wouldn't really get any damage I was expecting, but well, my opponent just killed it. And then we went to the combat with the Necromancer, and his 4 attacks actually didn't manage to knock down my Necromancer, so I could strike back with my Breath of Corruption, and I managed to do I managed to take him down to just 1 wound left. So that was a shame. And then in the end, well, in a later combat he managed to flank charge with his other unit of knights. So this knight unit hasn't done anything really the entire game, except for now in this turn to charge my my BSB unit in the flank. So Yeah, I would say that, yeah, as I said before, the knight unit could have had a bigger potential than it was doing now. So here you can see my before last turn. So my opponent has a unit of Dread Legionnaires that he desperately wants to get into the forest on the left because of the secondary objective. He still has the Dread Judges that can claim it though. But my Vampire Knight is ready to push him out of the forest. So I thought that I had to play my Vampire count to make sure that he couldn't get there with his Dread Legionnaires. So the only possibility for him to get there was to, this is his last turn, to cast a Raven's Wing, but with that you also lose your scoring, I believe, for one turn. So then they wouldn't count as scoring. And then in combat I actually managed to do 5 wounds or something. But my opponent also manages to do a single wound on my vampire count, which is the single wound that makes sure that I don't just stand there. And then next turn I could still have stood, maybe, because he didn't have to charge anymore, etc, etc. And I could have cast Pentagram of Pain, just going all out. Would have been nice still. But then we go to my last turn. My Vampire Knights, they charge into the Blades of Nab. The Dread Judges, sorry. And yeah, so I have 7 attacks that hit on 4+, and they all miss. Every single one of them misses. So that was disastrous. And I don't manage to do any wound. Luckily my opponent also doesn't do any wounds, but I was just so counting on scoring the objective still, but in the end I didn't. And yeah, just looking back at it, there were some critical moments where the game turned around. So the most critical moment was the moment where my opponent was actually able to knock out the Court of the Damned with the Assassin, and I could partially blame it to the fact that the Great Bats were misplayed. I shouldn't have put them there. I should have gone for the safe option of just putting them behind my unit. But that's a good reminder of why you do stuff like that. Why you try to keep chaff like that just perfectly safe, basically. Just also to give to not give your opponent any charge lanes that you might not see yourself. And now, well, there were also some critical moments that were just too lag. For example, the Vampire Knights at the end. So what it turned out to be, it was a 15-5 to my opponent, now including the secondary objective. And then if the Vampire Knights had actually killed the Dread Judges, it would have been an 11-9, also because of the points of the Dread Judges that just would have tippled it over. And I must say that an 11-9 out of this matchup, seeing how badly it went with the court in turn 2 or 3, is not even that bad. So my opponent tried to well, with some games, with these 2 games, he tried to convince me that the Dread Elf army is quite competitive after all. And getting a result of just 11 points realistically, because, well, the Vampire Knight should have just crushed the Dread Judges there. Because even just the break test that he had to take was at discipline 5, because I cause fear, I have a charge, and I have a banner, and we both didn't do any wounds. Oh, so it's at discipline 6 because he also had a banner. So I should have had the secondary objective, and then it wasn't 9-11. But you're not gonna win any tournaments with that. So the amount of stuff that you lose during the process with a list like this kind of limits you from being able to get big wins, which you need in singles tournaments at least. So thank you for watching, and I hope that you enjoyed it. See you on the next one.